will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh! He doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
With 5 seconds, he's going to throw it. Howard leaps. He has it. Touchdown. Carolina back from the dead to tie the game with 2 seconds to go. There is a flag down. But holy smokes.
2 and 4 in overtime games. Carolina 1 and 3. Here from under center. Give off to Greg Little. Little pulls away. Little is going to score. Carolina wins.
Snap back, spot down. The kick is cleanly away. It is good!
And it's
with
yes,
a 54-yard field goal. And how about them Tar Heels? They do it!
Possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Hunter Burns.
In his end zone. The punt, very high. Switzer will have room to return it. He fields it at the 40. Coming near side, Switzer at the 50. Switzer, 45, cuts back at the 40. 35, breaks a tackle at the 30. Still on his feet. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Ryan Switzer for 6. He is doing his best Giovanni Bernard impression. Ryan Switzer again. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, with you guys as always. And tonight, putting a bow on the preview editions of the podcast for this season when it comes to previewing this 2024 roster. We've got the defensive backs tonight, a unit that I don't really know entering the spring if we thought we were going to be as excited about this group as we are now. But there is a lot of fun stuff to talk about with them. And then we'll go from an exciting group to talk about to one that is not anywhere close to exciting to talk about when it comes to this team because we just don't know. There's so many uncertainties. That would be the special teams unit. But first, we got to talk about a couple of news bits that were released from camp within the last couple of days. And we'll start with the one that was released yesterday and is pretty interesting, probably a little frustrating for a lot of Tar Heel fans. And that is the fact that the team is not going to release a depth chart prior to the opener. And this is something that most teams do. I know it's not a requirement. I think, again, when you've got CBAs and stuff like that in the professional sports, they may require you to release something like that before your first game. That is not the case in college football. And so the reason why Carolina will not end up releasing the depth chart is simply because Minnesota isn't going to release theirs. So I guess Carolina feels like in their mind, by releasing the depth chart, it could give some sort of insight into, one, of course, who's going to be the starting quarterback. Now, typically, I would believe that Carolina probably would just put an or next to the name of whoever they have on that top line, whether it be Max Johnson or Connor Harrell. You would believe that they would probably still try to make that seem like as much of a mystery as possible. But I guess they don't want any of the other battles to be revealed that are going on either. So I guess this is their way of trying to be as secretive as they possibly can. What did you make of the move from Carolina to not release the depth chart as a counter move to PJ Fleck and company not releasing theirs?
Yeah, look, I understand it. It's gamesmanship at its finest. I don't like it. And look, I know they're are rules that allow for this type of stuff to happen. I do think, I know the SEC is getting close to almost requiring teams to release a depth chart on a week-to-week basis. We might see that probably this time again next year. But I mean, I do feel like, for your fans, it is kind of, it's just kind of frustrating because we know how important this quarterback battle is to this season. And I mean, I've talked openly about how I think this first game is a swing game for Carolina. They win this game on the road, I think this team's going to be 5-0, 6-0 when we get to October. I don't know if they lose this game, what that happens, and your confidence level would change in terms of if you know who your quarterback's going to be. I would imagine that Mac Brown would now not say anything publicly about it because if you're not going to put it on paper, why would you say it? Why would you not say it openly? So, and look, yes, there are other battles they're trying to figure out. Nothing as important as the quarterback battle. And so they're going to try to keep that a mystery until someone walks on the field to take to take that first snap of the season. And so it's going to be interesting to see who that guy ultimately is. So I understand it as a fan that spends a lot of my personal time and a lot of my money supporting the program, though. It is frustrating not knowing who my quarterback's going to be in the opening game in the season and what's going to be a make or break year probably for our head coach.
Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. They don't really owe us anything, unfortunately. Like, that's just...
Yeah, see, that's where I disagree. I think you do owe your fans something.
I mean, you don't. I mean, what is a depth chart really going to show them? I mean, the thing is, like, you don't. To be honest with you, there's a good chance that they will not know who their quarterback is until they actually take the field that night. Now, look, if that's Mac Brown's decision, that's not going to happen. He has pretty much said as much that, look, I want there to be some sort of decision at quarterback by the time we get to that game. He wants to have the guy a week before. He wants that person preparing for that game, going through the game plan and being able to learn how to execute it at the highest level, which makes a lot of sense. But I think, honestly, this is an excuse for them to continue the quarterback battle if they do not think that there is enough separation between these guys. I've seen some rumors that people believe that Max Johnson is ahead. I'm not 100% certain if that's actually the case, but anytime that I've seen people talking about the battle, it seems like it's leaning more towards Max Johnson. I will tell you what this means is there is no chance that we will hear from the quarterback before the start of the year. That was something that Mac Brown said that he wanted to do. That was, he stated that at the start of fall. He stated that back during the previous two quarterback battles. And we heard from both of those quarterbacks before they officially took the field. You knew that Sam Howell was the guy against South Carolina, and you knew that Drake May was the guy going to Florida A&M. But in this case, it's, I don't know. It's just it's an odd thing for Minnesota not to release their depth chart. I don't really know what Minnesota is hiding on their depth chart, considering that they do not have a quarterback battle as far as I'm concerned. The transfer Max, I believe it's Max Brosmer is how you pronounce it. He's going to be their guy. So I don't know if there is something scheme-wise that Minnesota is not wanting to release. They do have a new defensive coordinator, so maybe they're trying to keep Carolina guessing as to what kind of defensive front they will run or something like that. But, I mean, yeah, this is just what it is. This is the game that these coaches like to play. I mean, the biggest thing for me is, and I think what most people, are wondering is, with this, I mean, is this roster officially going to be set by the time that this team starts preparing for this game against Minnesota? And it's not just quarterback. They have a battle going on at left guard, apparently. Are they going to be rotating those guys in and not able to build the chemistry down there on the offensive line? I think that is what should concern people the most, is that you will not have guys ready to go for the first game of the season, because this is just a reason to extend some of these these roster battles that, in the past they wanted to have settled and at least figured out when they put out that first depth chart. So we'll have to see. I think the more concerning storyline that's coming out, even over this one, is the fact that Carolina is looking at a very realistic situation where they will not have Amari Campbell in the first game. Tommy Thigpen, the Tar Heels linebacker coach, was asked about his status when he met with the media on Thursday. And look, he did not say that Campbell isn't going to play. There's still a chance that he will. He did actually bring up Chaz Surratt playing in the past with a cast on his hand, which I remember that. I'm trying to remember. I think it was the middle of 2019 that happened for Surratt, but I could be wrong on that one. But still, it seems like, when he was kind of asked directly about it, he said that he's going to be out a couple of weeks. If you follow the timeline, that Thursday, of course, that's exactly the game, the day of the first game. And then, the bigger concern was when he was asked if he, about him being available, he said, "I hope so." So I don't know if that really sounds like a guy that's all that confident that his sophomore linebacker is going to be out there. And if not, then Carolina's got some work to do to try to find the guy that'll be out there in his place.
Yeah, look, I think we'd love to have him. Ultimately, this season is a marathon. It's not a sprint. You got to protect him, probably more so from himself, trying to have him go out there and play while not being 100%. So, and we talked about this possibility last week, and you could see a situation where you see a lot of one linebacker defensive sets out there, just because you don't know if you're going to have someone ready to go that you trust. Maybe you see a situation where you play a hybrid safety play in that second linebacker spot. You see that now in today's football more than you're accustomed to. So the good news is we're still 11 days out. Maybe this guy's a fast healer. You just never know. But the goal is to not beat Minnesota the season. Like the goal is to put yourself in a position to play meaningful games into November and win those games. And for Carolina for Carolina to do that, they're going to need this guy on the field. So it'll be disappointing, but it's something that hopefully Carolina can find a way to overcome in the short term, create some much needed depth at that position, and hopefully his absence won't be too sorely missed if he's not able to go in the opener.
Yeah, I think if he does not go, there is a good chance that what ends up happening is they will probably rotate multiple guys there, because I just don't know if there's somebody that's standing out that much. When Coach Thigpen was asked about it, he said that the guys that have had the best camp, he mentioned two of them that have had good camps, and then talked about two other guys progressing along. He said Lavallee and Cade Law, that is the older of the two Law brothers, who is now on scholarship, by the way. I think last time I said he was a walk-on. I did not realize that. He is actually on scholarship. So clearly he's making waves with the staff. And so both of those guys, I think there's a good chance you could see them. Maybe a little bit of a smaller chance that you see Michael Short and Ashton Woods. But, look, this is, I think, what we're going to see is Campbell, if he plays, he is going to pretty much not practice up until that game. So that means that there's, the good news is I don't think Minnesota's offense is going to really change that much. I don't expect it to be an offense that all of a sudden turns into some air raid offense. I think it's very simplistic. They want to run the football and use that to open up the play action passing game. That's pretty much what they've done for years. I think that's still going to be in place. So learning what they're going to do, I don't think is the biggest challenge. I think the bigger thing will be how effective will he be able to be when he's out there if he has to be in a full club. Who knows if he is, or if he's just going to be in a cast where his fingers are available. If that's possible, then you would feel pretty confident that he will play and that he will be a guy that can be effective. It's if he's got that full club on, then you have to look at the other guys and say, hey, you're going to have to play some in this game. So, I mean, look, I'm worried about it, especially because we know how good Minnesota is at running the football. They've got their starting running back from a year ago who was tremendous as a true freshman. So, yeah, there's reasons to be concerned about that. But you're right. Ultimately, the biggest thing for him is that you don't rush him back. You get him healthy so that you have him for the games that matter the most when you get to conference play. And the good news is even if you lose that game against Minnesota, you have 3 games after that where you feel like you should be able to win, even if he is not available to you. So to me, it's just finding the right rotation if they have to go to it in that first game. And whoever steps up and shows you that they're capable of it, once you find that guy in game, just stick with him moving forward. And you mentioned you can also throw in multiple defensive backs. DeAndre Boykins is a really good tackler. We've seen that, very involved in the run game. When he was playing that star position a few years ago, that might be the strategy that you take going into this game. All right, well, we talked about one of the defensive backs, so why don't we dive into the defensive backfield for this season, because it's a group that Mack Brown is really as excited as I've heard him about a group in a long time, especially on that side of the football. And look, some people may say, well, it's the defensive side of the ball. You've said with the hype around the defensive line that we should probably take that with a grain of salt. Yes, because with the defensive line, we've heard all this type of stuff before. I don't feel like we've heard the defensive backfield really be hyped that much. I mean, last year, especially the safeties, I feel like for years we've just been hearing they're solid. They're guys that have been in the system for a long time. Well, now it's a group of guys that I think are actually really, really skilled. And now that everybody's healthy back there, there's a chance that all 4 of these guys could create a rotation that produces some really, really productive numbers. So when you look at the safety position, I think that's what you got to start with. You've got Stick Lane, who was tremendous last year, was never a full-time starter and finished 3rd on the team in total tackles with 62. You've got Jakeem Harris coming over from NC State. He got hurt early last season. He was a starter for them after he had lost the job the previous year. I think he's very solid. He's not a guy that's going to blow anybody away, but I think he's better than the group that Carolina has had back there the last few years, especially in the position that he's going to be playing, mostly field safety, which was where Don Chapman played last year. And then you get to Will Hardy, finally back healthy. He was banged up for most of last year. We saw the potential with him as a true freshman back in 2022 and liked a lot of what we saw. And then the move of DeAndre Boykins back to safety, a spot that he should have been playing all along. He's not the greatest cover guy. You could tell that going back to high school when he played the safety spot. He's a guy that's going to come downhill, help in the run game, and make people pay over the middle of the field. I feel like that group is probably the best safety group that we have had, maybe since Butch Davis was around in Chapel Hill, and you had some of those secondaries that had guys go to the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about this group that you got to love and appreciate is not only the talent, you've got some experience back there, but it's depth, and it's legitimate depth, and it's guys that you feel like are playing roles that are really specific to what their skill sets are. You're not asking guys to no longer play a position they don't need to play or they're not capable of playing. And so you're going to have guys back there that I think are going to be difference makers, guys that can, get down in the box and make plays in the run game. They'll bring a level of physicality you want and you need on the back end, guys that can maybe make plays on the ball and be impactful that way. And so, I know for me, I was never worried about the corners because I know what Huzzy is, and everyone knows that I'm a big fan of Marcus Allen. But, you're trying to really solidify the safety spot, something that, I think the first year when Matt came back, your safeties were good, not great, because they didn't really kill you. But it feels like since then, it's just been inconsistency across the board, and some of it was injuries, and some of it just wasn't good fits. It feels like now you've got the depth to overcome if you have an injury, and you've got guys that are just playing their role. They know what their job is. They're going to play within the framework of the defense, and it should lend to the best safety play we've seen at least since Mac Brown came back in his first year. But as you mentioned, maybe going all the way back to those Butch Davis's defenses, which put players in the NFL on an annual basis.
Well, Mac Brown's first year, I think the thing that you liked about that group was it was the 2 miles, and they played almost every snap, and they were incredibly effective because, Miles Dorn was a guy that could, do both, help in the run game, was really good at dropping back into coverage and making plays down the field, not getting beat over the top. And Miles Woolfolk, we, of course, remember huge turnovers that he created in the season opener back in 2019. And then, he was a guy that was also rather effective coming up in the box and stopping the run. With this group, I think the difference and the reason why I went back to the Butch Davis era was because you've got a multitude of different guys. There's so much depth here where you feel good about every one of those guys. And I kind of compare it to when you go back and you had DeWanta Williams, you had Denoris Searcy, you had Brian Gupton, and Jonathan Smith, all guys who could play if needed. I mean, Jonathan Smith, he was a guy that didn't see a ton of snaps because the dudes in front of him were just that good. But if you had to play him a lot, he was a guy that would have been extremely effective. I feel like this group, there'll probably be more rotation, which I think is going to help out a lot. And I think you look at the versatility. There's some guys like Boykins, I think, is a guy that is going to thrive coming downhill and stopping the run. So you could see a lot of him against Minnesota. Maybe then when you move further along, you don't see nearly as much of him when you get later into the season and you see some of these teams that are wanting to air it out more. Maybe that's where you see a little bit more of Jakeen Harris and Will Hardy as guys that can cover down the field. The biggest thing that this group has to do is they have to eliminate the big plays over the top because it's something that's been discussed. With Gene Chizik, he brought that in first day that he was up there talking to the media. He said we need to limit the explosives. And at times, Carolina was able to do that. But the biggest issue was that they were getting carved up in the short passing game. But then eventually when they would try to slow down the short passing game, it led to these big gains. The other thing they have to do better than the group the last few years is tackle better because, that's what turned a lot of those short yardage gains into big plays because Don Chapman was not a great tackler. Giovanni Biggers at times struggled with tackling. So that's the thing is this group, it feels like there's reasons to be very encouraged. You like to hear that Mac Brown is raving about them because it's a unit. He hasn't done that much of the last few years. And so I feel like going in, there is good reason to feel like this group is in good hands. You mentioned cornerback. Well, one thing, you got Elijah Huzzie moving to the outside again. Last year, spent the entire preseason there, was raved about by Mac Brown and the staff for how good he played out there on the outside, matching up against teams' number one receivers, or that was at least the plan going into the season. But then the injury to DeAndre Boykins, they say, okay, Huzzie is a guy that knows how to play the nickel. We have to move him into the nickel. He's going to play there. So, look, it was understandable last year. They also really liked what they saw in the preseason from Tayon Holloway. That didn't really carry over onto the field. But now, you look at how effective Huzzie was last year. I don't think moving to the outside is really going to change that. I think he's going to be incredibly effective. And the fact that your best cover guy is now going to be able to follow the other team's best receiver if you want him to, I think that's a huge boost for this secondary.
Yeah, no, I think this will be a game changer for Carolina's defense. We know how talented, how gifted he is. It feels like he has a knack for being around the ball. And being able to make plays on the football is something that this secondary has really struggled with. It feels like going on for a decade or so. And so the ability to travel, I think, will be huge because it feels like at some point you're going to have to do that. You're going to have to let him move around the field. And he's capable of being a guy that you can move all over and he could still make plays. So really excited about this move, about his potential because, and we saw it last year, just the impact he has, whether it was on defense or on special teams. He's a game-changing player. And I think you're really going to see him shine and perform at that level. And this could be a guy that when the season comes to an end, if this defense takes the step that we want to see them take under Jeff Collins, he's capable of being an all-conference member. If the defense as a whole, when he has the type of season he's capable of having. And we haven't been able to say that about a Carolina defensive back, it feels like, in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, there were guys that we really thought were going to pan out to be those types of players. One that sticks out in particular is a former 5-star that was there for a couple of years and then eventually moved on and hasn't really found his footing anywhere else. But I mean, Huzzie is just the complete opposite. He's a guy that comes from East Tennessee, and it was a transfer up. I remember last year you were a little skeptical about what he would actually be able to bring to the table. He was this team's best corner, even while playing in the nickel. He was just that effective. The biggest thing for him, you're right, is unlocking the ability to turn the football over, because he did it at the FCS level, and he did it pretty easily. I mean, he had 6 interceptions in his final year at the FCS level. And then last year, I mean, just not able to be nearly that effective. But again, I wonder if this year being matched up on the outside, the area that he was most comfortable playing and did so at East Tennessee State, if that really ends up helping him and allows him to create some of those turnovers. But look, the turnovers are a great point because there's guys that have done it in their past. You look at the transfers that Carolina had from last year that are going into their second year. Both Huzzie and Stick Lane were guys that created double-digit interceptions in their careers before they transferred to Chapel Hill. So now it's time for them to find what they were able to do at their previous schools and allow that to be what happens this year on the field for Carolina. Because, yeah, that's the one thing that's been lacking. And you could say that, this defense, if they just tackle better, if they did this, if this group found a way to turn the football over more, it wouldn't look nearly as bad defensively as it has. Gene Chizik proved that back in 2016. Now, one of the guys that can also help with that is Marcus Allen. You brought him up. Well, Mack Brown, geez, when he talked about him earlier in the fall, I mean, it was as much as I've heard a coach rave about somebody in a long, long time. I mean, it was honestly, it was almost turning Mack Brown on how much weight this guy had put on, the frame that he had been able to build. It was, I'm telling you, it was something. If you haven't listened to it, I believe it was the one after the first night of fall camp. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but it makes a lot of sense. One of the things about Marcus Allen that stuck out as the year went along, first of all, he played the most snaps of anybody on this team. He played 915 snaps a year ago. I would hope that they have some sort of plan to not play him nearly that much because, yeah, he was worn out, especially when you play on the outside and you're having to go down the field with a lot of these receivers on these deep routes over and over again. It starts to set in for you. But the other thing was he just wasn't built physically to be able to handle physicality on the outside. Now he's built a little bit better. And with with Jeff Collins wanting to play a more aggressive scheme this year, saying that he wants to press a little bit more, which I hope he's actually telling the truth. We heard Gene Chizik say the same thing last year, and it never really came to fruition. I think with him putting on that weight, he will be much more effective doing that this year than he was a year ago, and that could really be the type of step that he needs in order to become a corner that Carolina needs him to be opposite of Huzzie.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, the last, year and a half where Marcus Allen was really playing quality defensive football. A lot of it was him playing off of instincts and just kind of, following the play and doing what he needed to do. But physically, I think you saw it just at different points where he was just overwhelmed. And so while you liked his, his energy, his effort, his durability, and the instinct stuff, there is the body part of it too, where you got to physically hold up. And no, the ACC isn't the SEC. It's not the Big Ten, but you can still get bullied in this league. And you saw that over the course of the season last year. I'd like to hear Mack Brown talk about me in a positive way after I've put on weight. I'd feel a lot better about myself. But now that he's got the physical to go along with all the other stuff that he has that works for him, I think you're really going to see him take that next step as a corner and be a guy that can hold his own and play, 750 plus snaps, but not get worn down and not get bullied on the outside in one-on-one situations. Be able to stick his head down in the run game and not get ran over. I think there's just a lot to like about him now that he's got basically the physical caught up with everything he else can do mentally. And so it's why I'm optimistic about these defensive backs. We know what Huzzy can be in his natural spot. We've seen Marcus Allen make a lot of plays. A year older for both those guys. Yes, a new defensive coordinator, but I think one that probably believes in their abilities more than Gene Chizik did. And I think you'll see that in the way that he coordinates this defense. I think it's reasonable to expect both of these guys to take a step forward, which would do wonders for Carolina's secondary as they look to become just an average defense across the landscape of college football.
Yeah, I mean, biggest thing for Allen for me is consistency. There were times last year where he would make amazing plays on the football. That's one of the things that stood out about him, is that he is a guy that creates PBUs at a pretty high level, but there's other times where he just gets beat over the top. And I think, again, that is a lot of it is due to that fatigue. I will say that I think this year, and I hope so, with the safeties that we just talked about, he will have more help over the top, which he hasn't the last few years. It's pretty much, even though Gene Chizik wants to play a conservative, cover two type defense, you're literally just dropping guys. Or, I mean, there's multiple variations of zone defense that he played. But, I mean, the safeties were never there over the top to help him out. It was pretty much either you're making the play on the ball or this is turning into a big play. So hopefully, they can find a little bit of depth behind him, and he'll have some of that help over the top that'll allow him to find a little bit more consistency himself and not wear down nearly as easily. Let's talk about that depth at that position, because it's not really that obvious. Like safety, you've got 4 guys. Those are going to be the guys that you're going to use. At corner, I mean, there are guys that it feels like this staff likes, but I don't know if they're quite there yet on thinking they can put them out there. I thought Tyrone Stewart, the JUCO transfer that was with the team back in the spring, I thought that was going to be the guy. And back in the spring, if you would have told me that, hey, going into the final week of camp as they get ready to prepare for Minnesota, the staff's still going to seem like they're kind of, that they're questioning some things about him, I would have said there is no way, considering how much they raved about him in the spring. But I don't feel like he's had a great fall. Hopefully he's able to prove to the staff that he is worthy of being put out there, because even if you just have one guy that you can rotate, that can give these guys a breather throughout the game, I think that's going to be huge. You've got him. You've got second-year redshirt freshman Ty Adams, who I think has really come on here in the fall. Didn't hear a ton about him towards the end of the spring. Heard more about some other guys that aren't really being talked about as much now, but he's a guy that we heard early in the spring before he started kind of leveling off was creating turnovers. If he can do that, then there's a place for him on the field. And then you've got the true freshman Jalen Thompson, who the staff has really liked what they've seen from him, and they think he is at a point where, few more practices of consistency, he's a guy that could be out there at some point as well. So plenty of great options there, but hopefully somebody emerges because, even, you brought up 750 snaps for Marcus Allen. I think right now it's hard to be confident that they could even get it down to that, because I know people are going to say, well, Carolina should look to slow down the pace, limit the snaps on their guys. At this point, I'm not holding my breath that that's going to happen, because we've been asking Carolina for years to sort of slow down the way that you play, help this defense out, and it just doesn't seem like that's the case. So the solution is finding that depth.
Yeah, yes, I do think, and I've talked about this over the years, it's really hard to want to slow the pace down. When you had the big play offense that Carolina just had. Like when you had so many guys that when they touched the football, they could take it to the house. Sometimes, we don't know how many times Carolina was calling touchdown plays or not. They just turned into them. We look at this offense, there is big play potential. This is going to be an offense that I do think is going to want to move the ball methodically up and down the field. And when you don't have an NFL caliber starting quarterback, I do think it changes the way you coordinate the offense, because I don't think Carolina is going to be chasing points the way that they were chasing points, because it felt like, if they could get into the 40s, they had a good chance of winning. This team's not built to win games in the 40s. Like it's not. If this defense sucks, Carolina's going to lose more often than not, because I don't think they can score 42, 45, 49 points week in, week out. This is going to be a team that I think is going to want to win games 28-34, maybe 34-28. And so I do think that there will be much more of a conscious effort to do that. But even if you do that, you got to have other options. Like, you got to be able to play other people. And, I think the one thing about Mac is he's owned the fact that we've talked about it and we haven't done it. So we got to quit talking about it. We got to start doing it. But we're also at a point where it's like, we're not going to believe we're going to see other dudes out there until we see other dudes out there. And so it'll be interesting to see if they find at least one other guy that they can trust to rotate them out there throughout the game to kind of, lower the snap level, because a big part of the reason why this defense has fallen apart in the last 2 seasons is because by the end of November, they're just gassed because of how many snaps they've played leading up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you want to see guys getting worn down. Talked about how Marcus Allen played the most snaps on the team. Go back to the game against Duke. I'm going out on a limb here and saying that if you had a guy that could rotate in for him, then maybe he doesn't get beat over the top because he isn't nearly as worn out late into the game as, what we saw in that instance. The thing that is also interesting, I mean, last year injury was the reason why you didn't have nearly as much depth, because look, and this is a strategy they've gone with multiple times now. When they played Tayon Holloway and they realized that he was not the guy, you did not see him the rest of the year. They went to Armani Chapman, and that was it. So, look, I don't know if that's the right strategy. I really don't, because they did the same thing the year before with Dante Balfour. Balfour, now it's at a lower level, but he went on to Charlotte and turned into a first-team all-conference player that created a lot of turnovers. So, for Carolina, I would hope the same approach isn't going to be taken. I think a new defensive coordinator probably isn't going to be that strict where he's going to take a guy out and say, we ain't seeing you the rest of the time. But, this year, as long as you can stay healthy with your top 2 guys, having someone that you could put on the field just in limited reps. And that's the other thing. We're asking this person to play 10, 12 reps a game. Not, we need you out there for 20 to 30 snaps. No, that's not at all what we're thinking. unless, one of these guys really just takes that big of a step and all of a sudden you think, okay, there's certain scenarios where you can use them. I don't see that happening, but I could see a guy like Tyrone Stewart, maybe Ty Adams, or even Jalen Thompson, if he continues to build on his great fall camp, becoming that type of guy that can sub in. Now you go inside to the slot position, and you may be asking, well, what does that position look like with Elijah Huzzie moving outside? That's where Caleb Cost is at. And you talk about the guys that are really standing out in camp MVPs. Caleb Cost might be that dude. And it's great to hear because he was not with the team in the spring. He was with the baseball team. He's playing both sports. The bigger concern was that late in the regular season he ends up hurting himself and had to go in a cast for about 6 weeks. There was some concern that it was an injury that could be re-aggravated. So far, that's not something that has happened. And he has shown the staff everything that he's needed to show them after what was a promising performance, one of the few ones that we saw in the bowl game against West Virginia. This is a guy that when I watched him play in that bowl game last year, I said, if this guy has a chance to start for this team, he needs to be out there. And I'm happy that the staff is liking what they're seeing. I was a little concerned about the fact that he was playing baseball. They would look at that and say, well, since he wasn't with us in the spring, this has opened the door for other guys. It does not seem like that because everything that he showed us at the end of last year, it has the makings of a guy that could turn into almost an all-conference type player with how good he played in that game against the Mountaineers.
I know this guy's proven to be cost-effective for both the football program and the baseball program, and is going to be a dude that I do think is built to have a really good year and really solidify the inside of Carolina's defensive back room and really help allow an Elijah Huzzie to play at his natural position, allow a DeAndre Boykins to play at his natural position, and maybe get the most out of those dudes, which is why we're sitting here saying that this is maybe the most complete the secondary has been in Mack Brown 2.0, because it feels like all the pieces to the puzzle have fit right into place. Mm-hmm. And you're not asking guys to do something they're not capable of doing. And I think that, and I think if you see better play from the secondary room, that'd be a big reason why. Is because guys are playing where they're comfortable. Guys are playing and doing what they're capable of doing. They're not being asked to do something they can't do. And if they're building that cohesiveness in the secondary and they've got that trust with one another, I think you'll see less blown coverages. I think you'll see limited and explosive plays allowed. And if Carolina does that, then the defense will take the step forward we've talked about seemingly every offseason since Mack Brown returned to Chapel Hill. So we'll got to see how this preseason hype translates onto the playing field, because he looked good in a bowl game. But, the bowl game, you're not on the road in a Power 5, Power 4 environment. You will be 11 days from now. So we'll see if all this hype is just that, or if there's substance to it, and when he walks on the field, he'll be a difference maker for Carolina in the secondary.
Yeah, I think there's reason to believe that he will be, though, because one of the things that he did more than anybody that you saw last season, and this is even guys like Huzzie and Marcus Allen, he was outstanding playing the football. I mean, he had 2 pass breakups in the game. It was every time that they threw at him, he was making a play on the ball. There wasn't a time where you looked at him and said, oh, man, he really got beat there. And for him to be in his first game, that was really the first action that he had seen all year. And there was no choice. Carolina had to use him because Elijah Huzzie was not available for the game after he got hurt. And so, I mean, for him to be thrust into that position against a West Virginia passing offense that I think was a lot better than people thought it was even coming into the game. That was what I think has me feeling confident that he can be effective in this defense. If we didn't see him at the end of last year, I'd kind of be at the same point that I am with some of the other guys where it's like, okay, we're hearing good things about him. Because I've never seen him before, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I am a little nervous. I'm not really that nervous because we've seen him be effective, and it feels like he's a guy that the one thing I'm interested in is how involved is he when it comes to the run game. I didn't think he was that involved in the game against West Virginia. It didn't really have to be because, well, in terms of running the football, they were either just running it right up the gut or it was just Garrett Green keeping it around the edge. Look, if your guys off the edge are not going to contain, then it doesn't really matter what you do as a nickelback. You're not really going to be that effective. So we'll see what they're able to do with him. I'm also, with the aggressiveness that Jeff Collins is bringing to the table, he will probably use him in a lot of blitz packages as well. So that'll be interesting to see. The good news is depth there at that position, really good as well. That's the benefit to having a guy that's not with you in the spring, is that you then have to use other guys in his place. And so Trey Miller was the guy that they put in there for the majority of the time. They were waiting for Ty White. Well, Mack Brown has said both of those guys are capable of playing. So the fact that you've got those guys in there that can be effective if something was to happen to Cost, or, if something is to happen to one of the other guys on the outside and they choose to move Cost out there, it's good to hear that they have got the depth that they need at that position. Deeper depth on the roster, a lot of true freshmen. You've got the two corners, Zion Ferguson and Khalil Conley. And then you've got the two safeties, although Jaden Patterson's a guy that can be used in the nickel as well. And he'll be there along with Malcolm Ziegler on the back end. The walk-ons in this group, you've got the sophomores, Major Bird and Jaden Selby, who are back on that side of the ball after spending the spring at running back before Carolina added a couple of guys to that room. And then you have redshirt freshman Jack Blythe and Reggie Love, as well as true freshman Miles Gaddy, Blaine McClure, and Kenyon McMahon. That'll round out the defensive back unit for this season. Now we'll quickly move on to the special teams unit. And yeah, you go from a lot of excitement and feeling like you've got a pretty complete unit to a unit that is as far from complete as maybe any on the team. Noah Burnett is back, and that's something that you would think you feel pretty confident about, considering that he had a tremendous 2023, was second team all conference. I voted for him as my preseason kicker of the year, or the first team kicker when we did the media polls back at ACC Media Days. And, the thing is that I'm hoping that he was able to find his rhythm again in the fall, because the reports coming out after the spring were that he was struggling. He was going through a rough patch. This is the thing with kickers that is weird, is that they go through stretches like this, and especially in camp. Last year, he didn't even come close to winning the starting job. He was battling for the majority of the offseason, and Ryan Coe pretty much ran away with it. Ryan Coe comes in, misses a kick early in the season, gets hurt in the second game of the year against App State, and then that's it. You never hear from him again. Burnett comes off the bench and turns into a star for Carolina. So it's really, for kickers, all about getting yourself in a rhythm. I'm cautiously optimistic that Burnett can find that rhythm again, because Carolina really needs him to be a weapon for them on the offensive side of the ball, especially with the fact that we just don't know what this offense is going to look like, especially early in the year, with a new quarterback and new pass-catching weapons as well out there.
Yeah, no, we got to be confident that when we cross the 40, we're not in 4-down territory every time, because there's going to be games like the opener where if a drive stalls at the 27, 28-yard line, you need to be comfortable kicking field goals, because 3 is not greater than 6, but 3 is greater than none, and at the end of the day, that stuff adds up. And so you got to that point last year where it felt like you didn't have to score a touchdown every single drive. And once you got across the 40, you could, if you settle for 3, it wasn't the end of the world. And hopefully just whatever was not good in the spring just got corrected. It could have been just a slight mechanical flaw. Like, I look at kickers a lot like when you talk about a baseball player, like when a pitcher talks about pitching or when a hitter talks about hitting. It could be the slightest mechanical issue that we don't know. We can't, I'm not a kicking expert. I'm an expert on a lot of things. Kicking is not one of them. But they know they're off. They spend time in the film room. They spend time on the practice field. And the next time you see them, you don't even know that they look like that. So let's hope that's what that is. Because they're going to need him, maybe not to win the team a game or two, but to help keep the team in winning position in a game or two, because there's going to be games where this offense isn't scoring touchdowns, but field goals can win you games. And you got to have the confidence in him. And if he looks anything like he did last year, I think this will be all for naught, and this will be a guy that we'll be comfortable with if he's having to kick meaningful field goals for Carolina this upcoming season.
Yeah, and look, I would like to tell you that he's gotten back in that rhythm. They just haven't really asked a whole lot about special teams. They asked about it to start fall practice, and then since then, it's just never really come up. This is a position that more than any position in the sport, it is all about where you are mentally, because once you miss a couple, it starts to snowball on you. And you may say, well, they talk about the mentality of defensive backs and stuff like that. You play so much that eventually you don't even if you get beat over the top, you don't even have time to think about the next play because it's happening within the next few seconds. For kickers, you miss a kick, you're standing on the sidelines for who knows how long. You could be standing there the rest of the night until the final seconds, and you're back out there having to correct a mistake that you made earlier in the game. So that's the thing, is you're hoping that he's in that right mental rhythm. And if he is, then Carolina's in good hands, because he showed last year he is as good as anybody in this conference when he is on. The bigger concern for Carolina in terms of the kickers on the roster is Tom McGinnis. He had a horrible year last year punting. There's just no way around it. And look, he was thrust into the fire when Ben Kiernan got banged up. I don't think he was expecting to have to take on that role as early as he did, but he was just simply not effective. And the problem is that the guy that we thought would be competing with him this preseason, Cole Maynard, entered the transfer portal. So Tom McGinnis really is your guy heading into the year. And when I heard Mack Brown say in his intro presser that Tom McGinnis had a bad spring, I have heard coaches before bring up that guys have struggled, or typically the thing that they like to go to is inconsistent. Mack Brown literally said right out he was bad in the spring. That's not a good sign. Now, he was asked a question about him. I think it was in his second presser that he did in the fall. And he said that he had been looking pretty good, but this is a guy that going in, Carolina needs him to be effective, but I said with some of the other guys, I just said with Noah Burnett, I'm cautiously optimistic. With him, I got to be real honest with you. There's really no optimism. I just hope I'm dead wrong, because I am as concerned about him as probably any player on this roster heading into this year.
Yeah, look, hopefully it's kind of what I referenced with Burnett, where maybe it was just a mechanical issue and it got worked through. And if not, it's probably more of a mental issue where He just has lost confidence in himself to be able to adequately punt the football. And if that's the case, that might not be a good thing. So, because again, like special teams, I think over the years, I think it's probably been devalued in the way that we look at it from like going into a game. Like you mentioned that it doesn't get asked about because no one wants to ask the questions about kicking and punting and coverage units. But in reality, that's the crap that when you really fine-tooth look at a loss, a lot of times that's where losses show up because you missed a field goal. You didn't.
Well, I mean, here's the other thing. With punting, you go back to last year. When did Carolina start to fall apart? After they lost a guy in Ben Kiernan who, again, and we've seen this for years when we go to games, people are so critical of some of these punters that we've had. Ben Kiernan was one of them. And you saw last year just how effective he actually was. Because once Tom McGinnis got in there, the returns against this punt return group were much more significant. And really, I mean, when he wasn't, out punting his coverage, he was just simply not punting the ball anywhere near far enough down the field. And it would give the opponent advantageous field position, which didn't help a defense that was already starting to wear down.
Yeah. So, when you look at losses, man, and like, yes, if your quarterback throws a pick six, if you give up 600 plus yards, that's going to be the reason why everyone tells you that's why you got beat. A lot of times special teams are the reason why you get beat. They show up in more ways than one. And so this cannot be an issue because I talked about the importance of Noah Burnett in the opener. There's going to be a time or two where Carolina's probably got to play field position. You're on the road against a Big Ten opponent that plays 3 yards in a cloud of dust football. There's going to be times where you're going to have to just simply flip the field and understand that if you do that, even though you didn't score, it was still a positive for what you did offensively. And so hopefully he's continuing to find more of a rhythm, more importantly, find more of a confidence boost because, we talked about this offense isn't going to light up the scoreboard. They're going to have to punt the ball more than they've probably been accustomed to the last couple of years. You need to make sure that that's a net positive for you and not a net negative.
Yeah, and look, here's the thing. They do have a guy in Lucas Osada that can do both. He can kick and he can punt. I feel a little bit more confident as a true freshman in his punting ability, just looking at how effective he was in high school. But the thing is, he didn't join the team until the summer, and this, he's really been trying to settle in. He struggled a little bit early here in the fall. And so, yeah, Tom McGinnis is going to be your guy out of the gate. Osada, you're just hoping he comes along if McGinnis struggles and can take over and at least be solid enough to help Carolina out. I feel pretty good about where Carolina's at returner-wise. You got Elijah Huzzy coming back. Of course, scored a touchdown last year on a punt return. He's a guy that I think, is he going to wow you every single time that he touches the ball? No. But when you average 9.9 yards per punt return, that's really, really solid and will set your offense up for success. Chris Culliver, we saw him in the bowl game. He looked pretty effective. The biggest thing for him is, can he continue to be that effective? Remember the previous year, we had George Pettaway. He returned the ball for, I think it was the final 3 or 4 games of the season, and he was incredibly effective. You go to the start of last year, he was almost afraid to return the ball at times. And then when he did, he averaged just 17 yards per return. So, I mean, that's the thing, is hopefully Culliver can carry over the momentum from what we saw in the bowl game. And if he does, Carolina will be in good hands. Biggest concern for me about all of these groups across the board, though, are the coverage units. The punt coverage group, and that means they're the ones that are protecting when the punter is punting the ball. They allowed 3 blocks last year. They pretty much injured their punter because that was a play where the punt got blocked. Kiernan scooped it up and was granted the first down, but he gets absolutely leveled. His face mask gets dented in, and he ends up hurting his leg, and that's what ends his season. So that's a group that simply must be better this year. And then the kick coverage unit was possibly even worse. They might have been the worst unit on this entire team last year because they averaged over 25 yards per return allowed. And it was a group that finished, what was it? I think in total yards, they were third to last in the country, third worst in the country. It for all the faults that you have elsewhere in this group, if these coverage units do not become better, and this is on some of the depth guys that are on this roster, Mack Brown's hoping, and this is how bad it's been on special teams, he's hoping that he will use certain starters, and that's why he wants the depth to be able to play more on their respective sides of the ball so that they can actually put starters out here that can be effective in actually achieving what this special teams unit wants to do. I mean, hopefully this unit is better this year, but Mack Brown's been looking for consistency from this element of the game since he came back in 2019, and there has not been a year yet where it has actually shown up. So we'll see whether this year is actually that year, but this is the group more than either side of the ball that I am holding my breath with and just praying that this group does not cost this team games, especially once we get down the stretch of the season where this team might be showing some signs of wearing down, and this group will need to be counted on even more. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Guys, head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We've got you covered on a bunch of different stuff right now. I'm going to put the article up going a little more in depth on what's going on with Amari Campbell, so make sure that you guys check that out. Plenty of other stuff. We wrote the article yesterday about the team choosing not to release the depth chart. We tell you what that means for the quarterback battle and everything like that. And then we do have some recruiting stuff. If you guys didn't check out yesterday's edition of the podcast, of course, we encourage you to go back and check it out. But you can also read on the website about Damon June Jr. committing to Carolina. So they have their running back commit after searching for him for a long time in the 2025 cycle. And I will be putting up probably tomorrow the scouting report from the game the other night in the state of Georgia as they kicked off their high school football season. Two Tar Heel commits went head-to-head against each other in 4-star offensive tackle Alex Payne and 3-star linebacker / edge rusher Anthony Cruas. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And, of course, as we get closer to the game against Minnesota, we'll have the breakout players for you for this season. If you don't know how that works, we give you 5 guys that we feel like are going to have breakout seasons for Carolina. And then we'll also have the bold predictions article. That'll be coming out within the course of this week. And then, of course, the next week will be spent giving you any of the latest information as we go right up to that game on Thursday. And, of course, Wednesday, be on the lookout for the preview where we'll go in depth to get you ready for that game against Minnesota. The recap of that game will be up later that night. And then we will have you covered with the podcast that will recap the game that Friday. So it's going to be an extremely exciting sprint down. We got 11 days until the start of the season. But then, yeah, once we're in it, you know how it works each and every week, how we do things. So make sure that you are both keeping an eye on the website and subscribed to the podcast, whether you want to watch it. That means you just go to the Facebook page and like it so you get notified anytime there's a video, or go to the YouTube page and subscribe. They will also send you a notification whenever we are live. And then, in terms of listening wise, if you're one of our listeners, anywhere you get your podcast, you can subscribe to this podcast as well as the Four Corners podcast, which is on those same all those same platforms, and will be on the Facebook page and YouTube page when we do go live and do video for that. So again, best place to check out all of the latest Tar Heel information, including the offseason basketball news. One place, make sure you check it every single day, HeelToughBlog.com. So once again, that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.